Nina and her mother, Sandra, had always been fairly close. But in these last 3 years, their relationship deepened to a whole new level. After Nina's divorce, she just felt like she needed her mom. And the two of them discovered that they actually enjoyed traveling together, and shopping together, and dining together, and just being together. It was comfortable and safe. And so, when Sandra was diagnosed with cancer, it was only natural that Nina should move in to care for her mother. Nina took Sandra to all of her chemo appointments. She kept track of all of her medications. And she stayed up with her on those long nights, just a couple days after the chemo when it kicked in. Nina was eternally optimistic and scoured the internet for possible trials and homeopathic juice remedies. All the while, Sandra grew weaker and weaker. The chemo wasn't working. Twice now she did another round of chemo and another round of chemo because Nina begged her mother to keep fighting. But now enough was enough. And Sandra and her doctors agreed that it was time for hospice. Nina appreciated the extra help, but she resented each hospice nurse and aide, and even the chaplain that came by. Nina was sure her mother could still beat this thing, and they were all acting as if she had already lost. Well, eventually, Sandra was asleep more than she was awake. And when she breathed, there would be that pause where Nina would hold her breath and wonder if this was the last one. No, Mama, no. You can't die. I need you. So Sandra inhaled again because Nina needed her. One afternoon, their cousin Beatrice was sitting vigil by Sandra's side. Her heart ached as she watched Sandra struggle for each breath, knowing that it was for Nina. Beatrice took Nina aside. Nina, you must let her go. She needs to go. She cannot stay. With tears flowing down her face, Nina finally found the courage and the words to give her mother permission to go. I think it must be one of the painful, one of the hardest, most courageous things in the world to give someone we love permission to go. It feels like your heart is just being pulled out of your chest. And it goes against our every instinct to survive. But often the time comes when the only thing worse is to beg them to stay where we know they should not be. I believe this is how Peter felt that day. Just moments earlier, right right before we begin reading in the gospel, Peter had been commended because he stated that he believed that Jesus was the Son of God, the Messiah, the one they had been waiting for. And the world was full of hope. And now this. And now as we read in Mark's gospel, Jesus so casually and openly shares with his disciples that he will suffer and be rejected and killed. Like it's no big deal. But it was a big deal. It was preposterous. It was contrary to reason or common sense. It was utterly absurd and ridiculous. No, no, no. First of all, if Jesus was the Messiah, well, then he was supposed to be getting ready to stage a revolt and to kick the Romans out, right? And if he was the king, well, who would dare to kill the king of the Jews? But even if they thought of that, he was the Son of God. There was no reason to worry. I mean, Peter had seen Jesus heal so many people. Surely, if it came down to it, he could heal himself. Peter must have felt like his heart was being torn from his chest, that it went against his every instinct. This must be a bad dream, or some crazy parable he had yet to understand. What would become of Peter if Jesus' prediction came true? And so, of course, Peter took Jesus aside to explain to him the error in what he had been saying. But instead of being thanked, well, to add insult to injury, Jesus called Peter an adversary, an opposer, or in our English translation, Satan. This sounds so harsh. But we must be firm when dealing with temptation. And make no mistake about it, Peter was tempting Jesus when he was begging him to stay and fight. He was trying to prevent Jesus from doing what he must do, from being who he must be. Peter wanted Jesus to stay, but he needed to let him go. But Peter was so caught up in his own fear, his own agony, that he had missed the rest of Jesus' foreshadowing. The part where Jesus said that on the third day he would rise. You know, just like Nina was holding on to her mother with all her strength, we too can get so caught up in our fear of death that we forget the most vital part of Jesus' speech. It's so easy to look upon human things instead of divine. This is the world that we can see, that we can touch. And even if it's suffering we know, it's suffering we know and not the unknown. but we have been promised so much more. Jesus tells us to take up our cross and follow, to leave human things behind, and like Abraham, to hope against hope. To hope against hope that our hearts will be put back into our chest. To hope against hope that the divine things really are worth thinking about. To hope against hope that when we lose our life, it will be found. Because God keeps God's promises. We cannot stop listening, as Peter did after the word killed. Jesus was killed, but then he rose. Death is not the last of it. It's not the final word. It isn't the end. Just as Nina found the strength finally to let her mother go, we must trust that this life is only the beginning, that the journey continues, and we must go where we must go and do what we must do and be who we must be, to pick up our cross and find life. Amen.